Good afternoon and welcome to our post SBC 23 broadcast. This is going to be some commentary and analysis. We have 8 or 9 different individuals that will be joining us in throughout this broadcast and some of the other broadcasts we'll do as well. Another one tonight at 7 o'clock and then tomorrow at 1 o'clock as well. So as they join and can come in, we will divert off and get their perspective and their view on a lot of different things. But to start with, we're going to just go ahead and begin looking at some of the things that have happened this morning in just the first session. Now, the most significant things that typically happen in the very first session of the convention, and this is historically, is really the presentation of the new motions. So those first motions that are presented, pretty critical. You start kind of getting a feel for where the convention, as far as the messengers are, kind of where they are, what they're thinking. Of course, there's a limited amount of time and a limited number of messages. Bart Barber, in moderating, he tried to assure the convention that he was going to be as equitable as possible and that they had tried to work out any kinks they had in the past. And so that was somewhat reassuring. I don't know if the messengers that are in the hall necessarily felt it was overly reassuring, but that's kind of what happens. So the convention kicked off this morning, and one of the first significant things that happened was this actual presentation of the new business that was going to be happening as we look at it. So in looking at the schedule for today, let me flip over here real quickly. We had the introduction of new motions this morning at 8:35, approximately 8:35 Central Time. And I want to take just a few minutes to look at some of the significant things that were presented during the motion time. So as we're going through the broadcast, you may have some questions that you would like to ask. So I would suggest that you ask those questions in the comments. And as you do, we will try to handle those. If we have other guests that have joined, we will look at those as well and see what kind of questions that you would like responded to as well during the time. But let's talk about these motions that were presented. I'm not going to try to go through all the motions. But initially, we noticed a pattern. Again, last year we heard several motions. In fact, the very first motion of the first session where this could be done last year was a motion to try to get NAMB to reveal their finances, do a financial audit that was basically a forensic audit of some sort. That was kind of messed around with parliamentary procedure. We did a video with a lawyer on that last year. Right after that, you can find that. But we tried to find out why 3 different people came trying to get this motion on the floor and be dealt with to try to get transparency at North American Mission Board. Well, what happened this year is we had a couple of motions so far that have been presented. There's another time for new motions. But so far, there have been a couple of motions about transparency. And the primary thing that has come up this time has been motions for the entities. And now all the revelations that have happened at Southwestern, you've got at least 2 entities where there's a lot of questions about financial expenditures. So the motion basically is that there be financial transparency that is equal to the IRS Form 990 for nonprofits. Now, what that is, if you're not familiar, a 990 nonprofit form, they file this every year. Normal nonprofits file this every year with the IRS. And it discloses a number of different things, 7 or 8 primary categories that you have to disclose in that form. That is a public form. So any nonprofit that you're interested in giving to or want to look into their finances more, you have the ability to do that. And you can look fairly deeply into exactly how they're handling their money before you give. Well, because we're a religious organization, our entities fall underneath the nonprofit status, but they're a nonprofit that is also an entity that is a business as a religious business. So they're not required to file a 990. So what ends up happening with that is we end up needing to have better financial transparency. And what a lot of people have said over and over and over is, look, we ought to have at least as much financial transparency as Planned Parenthood. I mean, is that a thumbs up, you think? I would think we would want at least as much financial transparency as Planned Parenthood, or at least as much financial transparency as a lot of other organizations. Any nonprofit, basically, that's not a religious organization, have to file this 990. So these motions for financial transparency basically are trying to get our entities to at least have the financial transparency that is expected of other nonprofits. And I think that really should be a minimum of what's presented. Now, specifically where this kind of started was with a lot of the revelations with North American Mission Board's misspending, the use of money as a, well, it's been called for the use of gaining loyalty, paying individuals extra money, large sums, buying houses, a lot of other things. So people started asking about the use of the money that was being used at the, with the North American Mission Board. Well, all that continued and has continued to mushroom. And now you have the revelations at Southwestern, which have continued to mushroom now. And we're going to find out more and more about that. So I think this is realistic that we ought to at least have that much expectation without a doubt. Another motion that came up was the motion on the selection of, and that an entity president nomination cannot come from the trustees or a trustee member. Now, this comes as a result of the trustee chairman. He was the trustee chairman on the executive committee. And he was not the chairman, I misstated that, not the chairman of the executive committee. He was the chairman of the search team for the executive committee, searching for a new executive, for a new CEO for the SBC. And in the process of that, only a few weeks before the presentation of a new candidate, the individual, and I'm drawing a blank, his last name's Wellman, I believe. But anyway, he resigned as the chairman of the committee and submitted his name, and they recommended him. Now, there's a lot of ethical problems here. One of them being that he sat on the search team long enough that he had the opportunity to interview all the other candidates. He saw the resumes and the recommendations and the referrals of all the other candidates. He saw all of that and then decided to throw his name in the hat at the last minute, and that's who they presented. So they flew he and his family out to Dallas. All the trustees were flown into Dallas, well, as many as could be there. Some, I think, came in by Zoom. And this was overwhelmingly like 52 to 31 or something. I don't remember the exact number, but it was overwhelmingly defeated to elect him as the entity CEO. Now, this is, in my knowledge, has never happened in the history of the SBC, where a search team has brought an individual to be presented as a chairperson in an executive position in one of our entities, and it's been rejected by the trustees. So this is called quite a bit of upheaval. And so this motion is trying to address that issue, that we don't have that kind of thing. A lot of the concern here is the inner workings behind the scenes of some of the things that happen with the committees, a controlling cabal, you might say, this behind the scenes. So some of the entity presidents, it seems like there's a lot of connections back to one individual. A lot have pointed back to Albert Mohler, and you had people come out of Southern Seminary and out of the church there where Kevin Ezell was pastor at Highlands. And you had, Tom Rayner came out of there. You had, well, there's a long list. We won't talk about all the lists, but there's a number of people that came out of there. So this kind of behind the scenes, putting people in places, positioning people has come to be a great concern for a lot of people, especially as they become aware of it. So with that knowledge and having this particular person recommended, being on the search team and then resigning just 2 weeks before, there's all kinds of check boxes you're checking, red flags going up for sure on that. So this motion is going to deal with that, obviously, for that. There was another motion that dealt with trustee training. And I'm not sure when I heard that one, if it was put in the proper format. I'm not an expert on that for sure. But we'll have to see how the business is dealt with in the future. They'll come back and they will rule on each of these motions. Is it thrown out? Is it improper? Is it going to be referred to the executive committee, referred to a particular entity? And so I'm not sure this one was worded properly for that, but the premise of it is really good. Something that I've been saying, and I know a lot of others have been saying for quite some time, that there needs to be proper training, not by the entity itself. This training needs to come from an outside entity. And there are lots of businesses. They're businesses that do nothing but this. They train nonprofit boards. And so they come in and set up a full training thing, what you're responsible for, who you're supposed to hold accountable, et cetera, et cetera. What's happened on our trustee boards oftentimes is each entity head, whoever is the president, oftentimes has a lot of say on who gets to put on their board as an entity. I know of one entity president. He's no longer a president of that entity right now. He's gone a few years back, but he actually flew. Happened to be here in the Atlanta area is how I know about it. But he flew to Atlanta, and when he came to Atlanta, he came for one sole purpose, and that was to take to lunch an individual, a man who he wanted to serve as a part of their trustee board. And so somebody asked him about him serving. And so this entity head flew to Atlanta, sat down and met with him for lunch. They talked for a couple of hours. He flew back to where his entity was located. And this individual told me, he said, no, I decided I wasn't going to do that. I felt it was manipulative and that it was improper for an entity head like that to be interviewing those who are going to be trustees. Just basically is what it comes down to. So that's a real problem. So this should be trustee training by an outside group. And then the last part of that training could be the entity on specialized things that the entity is doing. In other words, this is what our entity does. If it's a Lifeway, this is the key things that are in the model of our marketing. This is how we do this. This is how we develop products. All that kind of thing that they need to do. And then North American Mission Board, seminaries, whatever it is, they go through their specialized training as well for their trustees. But right now, it's all internal. So that training, if there's training at all, is done only in-house. And so it's totally controlled. There's nothing that dictates you need to make sure and cover these things with these trustees that are coming in at this point. So I think this is a huge motion. I hope that it moves forward and they're able to make it happen. There was another motion that was made on the release of the security footage from the 2021. This is the annual meeting in Nashville. But the interaction that happened between Mike Stone and Hanna Kate. Hanna Kate is the abuse survivor. And there was a big confrontation out in the convention hallway. There were some people around. There were some people that claimed that he was harassing, in a sense, this abuse survivor. Of course, he's an abuse survivor himself, as he said before. And he said on our podcast, when we've talked to him, we've talked about that. And so he, very unlikely that he was going to be abusive toward an abuse survivor to start with, just logically at that point. But anyway, that's what was brought up. It happened the night before the election when he was being placed in nomination as the president back in 2021. This blew up. It blew up Twitter. It blew up Facebook. It was all over the convention center there in Nashville. And there were all kinds of stories circulating. But the one who made the recommendation and brought this to the attention of the convention, brought Hanna Kate up there. It was Steve Gaines, not Steve Gaines, his son, Grant Gaines, came, and Hanna Kate came with him. It was a very emotional moment in the convention, but then looked at later as being very manipulative. And so that's a kind of a big problem. So he asked in this motion if Baptist Press would release that footage today before the presidential election. Now, I'm pretty sure that this isn't going to happen, just because the way it's worded is for Baptist Press. Of course, the EC operates Baptist Press. The executive committee operates Baptist Press. And so Baptist Press, they wanted it released through Baptist Press before the vote on the president this afternoon, which is happening at 3:10 Central Time. So if that were to happen, they wanted that to be able to clear the name of Mike Stone and be able to say without any hesitation, this is what actually happened. And it's evident that, he wasn't being abusive to her. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. My guess is it probably won't. It may happen eventually, but it will have to, because it was made in the sense or the position of a motion. I'm not sure that it will be acted on in that way by the executive committee. The executive committee would be the ones that would have to act on that for sure. Another motion was made that the SBC Credentials Committee investigate any churches that are friendly with LGBT or QT, I can't ever get them right, individuals. Anyway, in other words, churches that have become friendly with the LGBT movement, okay? And so this not a long motion, again, listening to the motion being made, I'm not sure it was made in the proper form to be accepted. It may be thrown out just because of proper form. That's really frustrating. When you bring a motion to the floor, you're trying to communicate something, trying to get the messengers to be able to act on something specific. But if it's not in the proper form, they won't accept it. And the reason is this isn't your small local church. So this is a huge, huge organization. A very small percentage of our total affiliated churches are there in New Orleans right now, and somewhat over 11,000, I believe it was this morning. So somewhere between 11 and 12,000 are probably there, and you can't operate just fluid like you would in your local church. So everything is going to have a motion and a second. They're going to have them speak for and against, 3 minutes each, all the parliamentary things. And of course, there's 3 parliamentarians up on the platform. One primary main parliamentarian and 2 assistants. And so they're double checking they go. So that's kind of a big deal. And there's a couple of limitations. The one word that concerns me here that I see as a problem with SBC polity, the way we're set up with every organization being autonomous, is if the executive committee through the credentials committee begins to be an investigating arm. Okay, if it begins to be an investigating arm, then what that means is that the SBC is having authority over local churches. They are dictating that. It's not just in friendly cooperation. They're actually investigating. And so that's been part of the problem with the sexual abuse issues is people think that, hey, we're just going to report this and they're going to send out an investigator. There's going to be some kind of investigation. And the executive committee can't put themselves in a role, place themselves in a role where they're going to be supervising as such, have an overarching approach, because that makes a hierarchy. And we already know that even went to the Supreme Court, the amicus brief that ERLC wrote. We know now that not only did they write that, but they were in I'll say they were in cahoots. I have to use my mama's word. They were in cahoots with the North American Mission Board for some 20 days before that amicus brief was filed on the wording and what was to be said, along with the Thomas More Society, who actually wrote the amicus brief. But it was submitted using the terms of organization. NAMB had the organizational ability over the Baptist Convention of Maryland, Delaware, used the term hierarchy, that the SBC was a hierarchy. Well, anybody who's been in Southern Baptist life for any time knows that the Southern Baptists aren't in a hierarchical polity. We don't have a hierarchical form. So that's just absurd. So we have to be really careful in the kind of things we ask the SBC Executive Committee to do. We have to be cautious that, we're just have to be careful that we don't put them in a position where they are literally, making a decision that they're mandating something, because that puts them in a bad position. It sets us up as SBC to be hierarchical at that point. We've got somebody else joining us here real fast. This is Ray. And Ray, let me see. Let's bring you in there. There you are. Yeah, Ray, good to have you. Ray runs the Evangelical Dark Web. And so Ray keeps up really closely with a whole lot of the things that are going on in the SBC. He's been live streaming the SBC basically as it happened. And so as he's been live streaming it, he carries on some commentary, makes comments about things that are happening, that kind of thing. I was over on his broadcast a little while ago for a little while as well. Ray, basically what we're doing is we're walking through some of these different motions that were made this morning. Let me jump down kind of one more of the main ones, and then let's come back. And
it's interesting that you said that the one motion might be seen as out of order. And then the investigatory motion.
Yeah, this one,
It's an ambitious one, but might legitimize concerns that they're creating a magisterium, which I guess is what you're alluding to. But
right, anything that starts doing that starts getting concerning, obviously, because it's what a lot of people will call connectionality, and it's when you start connecting them, and that's why in lawsuits in the past, the SBC has been sued hundreds and hundreds of times. You don't normally hear about it, but there'll be some kind of a lawsuit against a church somewhere. It could be Paducah, Kentucky, or somewhere else. And that lawyer gets ambitious, and so he puts in the lawsuit, the local association, the state convention, the SBC executive committee, all these, because that's where the big money is, obviously. And the SBC just says, look, we're all autonomous churches. And that church operates independently of us. They make all their decisions, et cetera, as you know what autonomous means. And so if anything, that was the problem with the NAMB and then the ERLC and their appeal to the Supreme Court in the McRaney case. All of that, starts trying to put that connectionalism, and even that amicus brief they filed, just talked about it being a hierarchy. Well, no, Southern Baptists aren't a hierarchy. So that's where this one may, with the Credentials Committee, it's just going to be, it'll be a balancing act. I don't know if they'll throw it out or if they'll send it to the Executive Committee to be considered, but we'll have to see how that does. Let's back up just a second, Ray. Let me, we looked at a couple of these other things that they did as far as motions. Just get a quick comment from you on some of these. This was the motion about financial, well, we had a couple about financial transparency, 990 standard. What did you think about that, especially from last year, thinking about all the transparency stuff last year?
I mean, I wish that meant more, because you go on the IRS website, they don't make the Form 990s for nonprofit organizations as public as they should be. Like, I think you got to mail or fax something to get those documents. So that's, but yeah, I think above the IRS Form 990 would be more ideal. But
yeah, I agree.
And you brought this up on my stream, part of the issue with the North American Mission Board particularly is that there's metrics that wouldn't go in a Form 990 that are actually more important in some respects.
Right.
So even for a seminary, one of the seminaries, students, and which they publicize that, but that would just be one example of how many people are being enrolled, what's the tuition.
Well, I think the objective of this, is really about the financial end of it. You mentioned North American Mission Board. One of the things that North American Mission Board doesn't do now, they did before the GCR passed and Kevin Ezell took over at the North American Mission Board, but they used to always report how many church planters they were funding. Okay. They used to report what states they were in, how many were in each state. Each state convention knew exactly how many funded planters they had. When I was serving in Michigan as an associational missionary, I knew exactly how many of my church planters were getting funds for the North American or from the North American Mission Board and our state convention. When I became state executive director in Michigan, same thing. We knew that until the GCR passed and NAMB took over, and they stopped reporting that. So now you can't get those numbers. So it seems like it would be logical to know we're now spending, instead of spending $27 to $30 million on church planting like we were before, and we were seeing 1,100 to 1,500 churches planted a year. Now we're spending $70, $80 million and not seeing but 500 or 600 churches. So, that's why the numbers don't seem to add up. Ezel, like in his presentation, he said, well, we're not going to take less than the best. We're going to take those. He didn't say 5-star. I've heard him say 5-star before, but only 5-star planters. We want the best people. And it's like, I agree. You want people who are capable of doing the job, but everybody's not going to be planting in a big city. You've got some guys that they have a hard time just speaking the English language right, but they love Jesus. They love Jesus, and they may not pass all of the other things that they have in their issues as far as assessing. But the reality is, this guy's leading people to Jesus. And what you have to know, it's one of the big problems with the lack of missional strategy at North American Mission Board right now. One of the things you have to know is you evangelize first, and then you congregationalize. You evangelize and congregationalize, and that's the process it needs to move in. So if you've got a planter who you can help in some way to be able to financially survive, who loves people, is going to be evangelizing the community, bringing people together, then he can be helped with organization and some of the other things that may not be his forte. But we've got a number of people that I've known that state conventions or associations or groups of churches felt confident in the gifts of that individual, and they just said, no, we're not going to mess with North American Mission Board. And they helped fund them and put them on the field, So I think the financial transparency is a huge deal. Our entities should give at least the minimum of what you see on that 990 financially. Now, and then the other stuff.
Another aspect to this is, and this is my conspiracy theory, like the SBC, I think they're lying when they say that they're being investigated by the DOJ for sexual abuse cover-up. I think that's a lie. I think that's the reason they want you to think, because the FBI hasn't, or no one from the federal government has commented on the investigation, to my knowledge.
Yeah, no, I hadn't heard anything either. Yeah.
So they basically, people have been running with the assumption that the SBC has said, like they're saying they're being investigated for this, but I actually think it's for financial impropriety. I think it's for a lot of because from what I've heard, it's the Southern District of New York, which is the flagship of the DOJ, and they handle Wall Street. They handle the SEC stuff. So I think they're actually getting investigated for financial matters and not the sexual abuse cover-ups.
That may be true, because
so
that's
going to play into that motion.
Yeah, I saw one guy on Twitter during this morning session. He made the comment after Ezel kind of he in his response, he only got 2 questions, which is a problem to start with. But in the 2 questions he got, part of his response, which he was prepared for, was, he had a $69 coffee maker, and, he owned his own house, kind of a thing, kind of a stab
he's
at
throwing Adam
Southwestern.
Greenway under the bus.
The seminaries all have a house, the president lives in. So he owns his own house. He's got a cheap, a coffee maker. And so the stab basically was that, it sounds like now he's doing what Southeastern did, and how they're responding to things. And so it's kind of, it's kind of like they all go to a school and they figure out exactly, okay, here's how do you respond to things. And there are people who do training in how to do response to abuse situations and all that kind of stuff. I get all that, but Ezel was well prepared. We'll put it that way. He was well prepared for that question. And I'm surprised there weren't some other questions that were even better,
He didn't handle the first question well about the whole Echo Church thing. So he didn't handle that well because he gave 2 excuses, and the 2 excuses that he gave were, 1, someone else did it, and 2, is this a standard practice?
Yeah, no doubt. Oh, you're still there. Sorry about that. I hit the wrong button. I'm still figuring it out. So I hit the wrong button. That was my fault. Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. That is an issue. And again, the with only being able to ask 2 questions and then they call time, there needs to be. This is the only business that the SBC has opportunity to do. I mean, as with messengers, right? They're only there for basically these 4 sessions, these 2 days, and that's it. And so there is basically percentage wise, there's so little time to do business, even in the sense of talking to your entity leaders. There just needs to be a longer time for questions. And if there are not that many questions to ask, during the time, fine, we'll cut it short and move on, but if there's 7 or 8 questions, let's take those, it makes sense to be able to do that without any doubt.
Now, I'm not the biggest expert on Robert's Rules of Order, but wouldn't you think that, like, do they have to accept the report that's given? Like, shouldn't there be a motion? Hey, do you motion to accept the North American Mission Board report?
Yeah, normally
shouldn't
there
this be
is
something that's more debated, I guess. And
yeah,
there's a vote to accept, just like there's a vote to accept the other reports that they give, like
right,
the committee
like
on
committee reports or whatever. Yeah. A lot of times in business sessions they do, but I didn't hear anything like that in the sessions today, and I don't remember that for the entity reports. This afternoon, when they do the other entity reports, we'll have to just kind of listen. There may be a blanket thing that they have done at one point or will do that says we accept all of our entity reports or something, but that doesn't really quite accomplish the same thing if there are any questions.
And then that would actually enable you to maybe ask more questions if you had to vote on it. But then again, they would probably just say, hey, motion to end debate and vote on the report. So
yeah. Well, let's jump back over on the NAMB report impressions. What were some of your thoughts of that? We hit on it just for a few minutes, but what were some of your thoughts about the NAMB report?
Well, I mean, he's showcasing his good highlights. Like, he's framing the numbers in the best way possible. 10,000 churches since 2010. I mean, that's a very good number because, 5 digits, 10, very good number to tout. But obviously, we know that the number is hollow. It doesn't mean anything because we don't know what NAMB's funding.
Right.
So there's a lot of that. You're talking about specific areas. I think he also talked about revitalizing rural areas, which does seem to be a greater emphasis this convention, especially when you look at the Resolution 1, I believe, that's on revitalizing, because I guess they think rural areas are completely dead or something. Maybe it's true in some cases, but I'm not sure. But so there's a lot of stuff like that going on. Not a whole. He gave an example of like a story in Canada. I'd like to hear more about what they're doing in Canada, given that hostile environment. But I mean, he gave his best foot forward, very polished. I thought he did a good job for what he had to do.
Yeah, no doubt. As far as trying to do something that was encouraging, again, not dealing with much anything negative. And, it's just kind of my thought that most Southern Baptists are, we're big boys and girls. Tell us the truth. Tell us what's really going on. Tell us what's happening. And then let us deal with it and move forward. And that's much of the pushback about the lack of transparency as far as financial transparency. But, there are other things that there's a lack of too, as far as that goes. Look at this. This was a couple of things Reform NAMB Now published about NAMB just the last couple of days. And this was one of their tweets with a picture of Johnny Hunt when he was president there at the Southern Baptist Convention. And it's just talking about some of the things that have happened related to Johnny Hunt. It's been increasingly revealed because he has multiple nonprofit organizations, and a lot of people are familiar with like Timothy Barabbas and some others, but he started a business also for a travel agency. His daughter runs that. There's several other businesses that are connected. And the interesting thing is that most all of these were being used by NAMB. Now, I don't know how many of them were being used by NAMB before, but when he went there as vice president, that immediately crosses into conflict of interest for working directly with his employer and receiving financial benefit. Interestingly enough, somebody did this chart, and this connects to NAMB all of these different businesses that are related in some way, shape, or form to Johnny Hunt. Now, I know it's not big enough to be able to see it, but you can Google it. There's some places where it'll pop up and you look at it full screen. But, this is kind of a concern when you look at this and look at the things that they're not doing to undo this. Additionally, here's a couple of other tweets that went along right with that one. One says NAMB leadership should be asked if all financial ties have been cut from all of Hunt's many organizations. This is especially important in light of the evangelism and relief budget being overspent by $33 million. Hopefully they'll expound on this from the stage, but unlikely. Of course, they did not. And then the follow-up, additionally, messengers must ask of the trustees if they've found and addressed any other conflicts of interest. It seems that several NAMB employees use their position to promote their own businesses and organizations. If so, are they paying them a salary and their organization? What do you think about that, Ray?
I mean, it's basically about conflict of interest. You got to make sure that the people that are in charge of NAMB aren't paying themselves a little bit extra through NAMB resources. I mean, that's a huge issue, evidently. And who knows what, maybe that has something to do with the FBI or DOJ investigation on the North American Mission Board and the rest of the Southern Baptist Convention, because I know NAMB's involved in that.
Whereas it seems. Yeah, but it's been hard to get information.
Only focused on the executive committee for the most part.
Yeah. And so you kind of think it's tight. Well, and the little kind of slips, I guess you could say, maybe leaks of some sort that have come out have kind of tied it to the sexual abuse issues. But I'm kind of like you. I don't think it probably is nearly connected to that as it is the financial issues. And, we haven't gotten to that issue yet in the convention, but they basically spent half of their total income this last year on stuff related to that, everything that is cost that they've been doing through the executive committee for that. And so,
I heard the outstanding legal fees are over $5 million is what I've heard.
Yeah.
So.
And initially it was supposed to be $2 million, wasn't it? I mean, they designated $2 million or something like that. I can't remember, but it seemed like it was right at $2 million. It was initially designated
and for the NAMB McRaney trial is like next week or something like that, right?
No. It was
they got pushed back even more
till September. Oh, wow. Trying to remember, September 20 or something. It's the third week of September, if I remember right. I'll have to look that up. But
so at first it was going to happen right before the convention, then it got pushed back conveniently, and then even more pushed back.
Yeah, and there were depositions that were filed, and some of the things that are quite interesting that came from that. In fact, let's get your opinion on this real fast. Hang on a second. Let me find the slide here. Oh, here it is right here. Hang on a second. Let's look at this for a second. Not that one. It's the next one right here. Okay. These were released, and I know you can't see this really well, but let me explain what this is. This is actually a slide that came from the depositions, some of the documents that were gotten in the discovery process. And this is a log of all the phone calls and the emails that were being made between the Thomas More Society, who filed the amicus brief to the Supreme Court, and they filed the amicus brief. And then not only did that happen, we thought that there was only communication between Thomas More and the ethics, right? The Ethics Religious Commission. And what they said was, well, we just didn't look at it closely enough about the hierarchical language, the organizational language that they put in there, right? So we just thought that was the only connection. As we look at this, that not only did the ERLC have communication with Thomas More, but about 21 days worth of documentation here showing multiple, and we're talking 20, 25, something like that. It was up over 20 communications happened with NAMB individuals that were representing NAMB with the ERLC and Thomas More about this amicus brief. So NAMB was on the front end and was aware of the language that was being used, representing them for an amicus brief to be on their side going to the Supreme Court. That's just absurd. it blows my mind away that and that would have never come out had it not been for the McRaney lawsuit, obviously.
I mean, I think it's weird that the Thomas More Society, they're supposed to be like a religious freedom and religious liberty sort of law firm. They represented John MacArthur in his lawsuit against the state of California, and which won like $800,000, and they're defending a case that's really not related to religious liberty. It's not related to really missions. It's a defamation lawsuit, or wrongful termination is kind of mixed in there, interference in organizations and stuff like that. So it's kind of outside their purview, as far as their stated or implied missional scope.
Right.
And, apparently they bungled it, or they're being thrown under a bus for bungling the whole hierarchy in the SBC thing.
Yeah, well, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe the Thomas More primarily had been connected with Catholic, organizational type things, a lot of representation for Catholic organizations. So not as many, Southern Baptists. Of course, our system is quite different as far as polity in the church between most high church organizations, Lutheran, Episcopal, Methodist, most of them. And so it's very, very different with the autonomy we have with all of our different entities and organizations. But now knowing, you could say, okay, well, give Thomas More a pass. I'm okay with that. It's not their job to know our polity. Okay. But it is our job, whoever it is, to make sure that our polity is represented clearly. Now, what should bother us even more beyond this is not only that they misrepresented themselves in court documents as to who Southern Baptists are and making that look like a connectional kind of thing. But not only that, but beyond that, now we have the Thomas More Society, who's been brought into the middle of this. Now we find out that NAMB has been aware of this all these weeks before, 2 or 3 weeks before. And so now there's all this connecting between them about that lawsuit, or the amicus brief about the lawsuit. It didn't go to court, but now attorneys can represent their client and say, well, look, this is in the court documents. It's already been placed in the court documents. And the court date got moved because after the last depositions, the attorneys for McRaney filed some additional paperwork as far as the documents at that point. And NAMB appealed to the court, and they asked for a judgment ruling again. They've done that several times, where it doesn't go to trial, just the judge looks at it, he makes a decision.
Right, so, summary judgment.
Yep, summary judgment. So they've asked for that multiple times. So they asked for that again this time, but it was denied. But they granted them another couple of months, because NAMB also said, well, we would like to do a couple of more depositions than they had already done with a couple of other individuals. And I think Bill Baker or Barker was one of those. Remember, he wrote really a scathing letter about what had happened at NAMB with him and his ministry role, and all the things that happened after that. And that had been published. And so they wanted, because that was released, basically to support McRaney's side, they wanted to depose him. I'm pretty clear that deposition is probably not going to go very well for NAMB. At least that's my guess. I hadn't talked to Bill about it. But,
yeah, it doesn't sound like the type of definite deposition that they want, or the testimony that they want to call.
Yeah. And I don't know why they would depose them. But of course, everybody they depose doesn't mean they're going to call them in court, right? So when they
don't want any surprises.
That's right. Well, when they depose them, they're trying to find out what they can get out of them, how they could use that to support their side, or they can use that to defeat the other side. It's all part of the game that happens in court. And so they could depose 10 or 12 people and only call 2 or 3 to the stand, if needed. And obviously people could be called that weren't deposed at that point as well. So yeah, no doubt. Well, any other thoughts about the NAMB situation at all at that point?
I think it's kind of it's kind of like an elephant in the room. Like, people know there's something wrong there with the money, and Kevin Ezell is trying to put the tarp over the elephant, I guess. And he didn't do it's kind of an insurmountable task to some degree. And he did a decent job. And I'm just saying that as an objective observer. Like, I'm not rooting for Kevin Ezell. He's the most powerful. He's the Phantom Menace, as I call him, in the Southern Baptist Convention.
Right. Yeah.
So,
well, he's the banker. He's
right.
the banker. That's
how
people refer to him. Yeah. Yeah.
And he doesn't have the force. He has the money. So,
yeah. So a lot of things have happened in the SBC in the last 12 years that have happened because of that. And again, much of this is highlighted in Chuck Kelley's book. And it's just amazing to me that more people have not gotten a hold of some of that information. But even Chuck Kelley, you were talking about the number of church plants a while ago. Chuck Kelley actually interviewed people at the North American Mission Board for this book, asking, he said, look, I'm just trying to put facts together. Would you tell me, how many we have, how many funded plants? And again, they wouldn't release it. They've been asked by reporters, they wouldn't release it. And it's like, if you're so proud of all these plants, he's bragging, this year about 10,000 church plants. And then the number they keep using, that by 2030, I think it was, by 20 or 2035, a third of the convention will be new churches. Well, then why won't you release the number of how many church plants you're actually funding and where the rest of the money goes? I mean, it's real confusing to the average Southern Baptist. Those are our mission dollars, at that point, without a doubt. Well, Ray, I think we're going to wrap up from this morning.
Right.
What would be some of your final thoughts? I mean, just wrapping up the morning as a whole. I mean, anything stand out to you?
Yes. So the Bart Barber address was basically kind of, I took it as, we're so beautiful. And it kind of came across as the song and dance. Like, yes, we're not perfect, but we're still really, really good in the shape that we're at. And if you focus more on the ugly, it's because you're ugly in your heart. And if you focus more on the beautiful, it's because you're beautiful in your heart. Aesthetics was a huge theme in Bart Barber's address, and I think it was used as a weaponization against his opponents in the SBC. Bart Barber spends a lot of time on Twitter, evidently, and he used his convention address to settle things on Twitter.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but you're right. Yeah. There's a number of controversies that have happened over the last year. Some of them have come just because of him being too Twitter savvy. He types too fast sometimes without thinking, I guess, and it's kind of blown up a few times. Yeah. Well, I thought he made some good points. He had
the beginning part was
positive
strong
things, and yeah, I think he did end strong. I think he came in and as they say, landed the airplane well. And that's good. And you've just got to feel for the guy. His mom just passed away.
He's very funny though. Like, that was a shock. Like, I didn't know he was that funny.
Oh yeah. No, he's quite the character. There's no doubt he's quite the character. Well, if you've ever seen any of his videos that he's done from the farm, and like one of the things he posted on Twitter, he posted this and it went to everybody. Obviously, he's got lots of followers, but he said, "This is really for my First Baptist Church Farmersville people." He said, "I just want you to know," and he's out in the pasture now, okay, and there are a couple of cows around, and he walks up to this one cow and he says, "Now, folks, some of you in First Baptist Farmersville you saw that we butchered a cow and we put the cow in our freezer. But I want you to know Lottie is not in the freezer. Here's Lottie right here," because one of his older cows is named Lottie. And he named another one Annie for the mission offerings, this
right.
Lottie and Annie. And so, so Lottie's, kind of famous now because she's the famous Lottie Moon cow, And so, but it had become a deal in the church. And so it was really a funny video, where he said, "I just want you to know Lottie's right here. We don't have any plans to butcher Lottie. We're not eating Lottie," the whole thing. And so, he's got kind of a quirky sense of humor.
And along those lines, I think he helped his re-election very well. He did a good job winning the room, as the Conservative Baptist Network likes to say.
Yeah. So. Well, he's personable. And it's really harder. A guy like him, he's going to win you quickly. For the most part, if you're in a comfortable conversation, it's not combative, but if you're in a comfortable conversation, he's the guy that you walk out of the room going, "Yeah, I kind of like him. Don't really agree with everything, but I kind of like him," just personally. In a big room, that's a lot harder to communicate. It's really hard to get that kind of a comfortable warmth across, when you're in a room with 11,000 people. But,
right. But he's
but I thought he did well. Yeah, I thought he did well. But I think you're right. I felt like there were some sticks, some stabs, back at some things. And of course, there's been a continual undercurrent, particularly against NAMB. And so, see, remember the NAMB lawsuit with McCraney has been going on now almost 7 years, which is absurd. And I don't even want to know how much money that North American Mission Board has spent of our cooperative program dollars. They have a staff of legal guys at NAMB that are employed by NAMB. They hired Butler Snow, which is one of the 6th or 7th largest law firms in the United States that they have an office in North Mississippi. And so they hired them because they were in the same district where they're going to be trying the deal. And then they went beyond that and hired, what was it? Hale. Oh, what's that other company? I don't remember.
I don't know.
I don't remember either. But they're a huge company as well. And the attorneys there have been even more pro the gay agenda, the LGBTQ agenda, all that kind of thing, very publicly. And they have represented Planned Parenthood. This law firm has represented Planned Parenthood in multiple cases. And that's easy to document. We've got that documented. And so the North American Mission Board has now hired them as a third layer of legal help, which makes no sense at all. And these aren't cheap law firms. They're not the $150, $200 an hour lawyers that you and I would probably hire. They're more in terms of $1,000, $2,000, $2,500 an hour lawyers. So, all that's really concerning, but a lot of this stuff has been kind of churning up in these last 6-7 years since that all started coming to light. And I think some of what Bart Barber is saying, man, we've had this continual undercurrent. And so he's kind of sticking back going, look, there are good things. And, I'm one of those that said, look, we've got to fix this. There's some things that are really bad, but you've got to step back and admit there are some great things happening. Southern Baptists are doing some tremendous things, even though our mission force is a fraction of what it was. It is now, we're trying to get missionaries back on the field. But when you had to bring home some 2,000 missionaries, we were over 5,000 missionaries at one time internationally. And then you don't have the funds, you start bringing those home and all those kind of things start happening. But even that wasn't really communicated like it really happened behind the scenes. So Southern Baptists, to this day, most don't really know what all happened with all of that and all the changes. So there are things to be fixed. And any huge organization, any large corporation that has lots of people involved, it's going to be an issue. When it's all volunteer, people forget that. The SBC is volunteer, okay? The Southern Baptist Convention is all these churches that cooperate collectively on a volunteer basis. So every church volunteers to send in money to the cooperative program, send in money to the Lottie Moon Missions offering, send in money to whatever, send relief or whatever. So they voluntarily do that. They choose to affiliate with the convention, their local state convention and their association. All of these things are voluntary. So you come back to it and you're basically working with a voluntary organization. You have paid staff, obviously, at the executive committee and other places, but it becomes much more difficult to try to work with all, if you're in a big corporation, you've got 20,000 employees, whole different ballgame. You can tell those employees, this is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to put on your email signature. This is how you're going to behave. This is how you're going to dress while you're at work. You can do that if you want to, if they're your paid employees. But in this case, everybody is independent. Everybody is voluntary. And it just changes the dynamic. So it makes it a little bit more difficult. But I don't think the overwhelming sense of what Southern Baptists are doing is all negative, but there's enough negative there. All the revelations that have come out about Southwestern are just shocking, the kind of, and I've been to Southwestern a bunch of times, not in the last few years, but I've been at the president's home and I've been in the Patterson Arena. They call it Patterson Arena. It's the big auditorium now they built while Patterson was there. Some of these other things, I've been in them. And even I was in the president's facility when President Dilday was there way back. And I'm telling you, it's a nice house. I mean, every house needs updates. Every house needs some new furnishings from time to time, that kind of thing. But to spend $1.5 million on furnishings for the president's home, that's absurd.
Yeah.
It's beyond me. Well, look, let's wrap it up for this time. We're going to jump back on here at 7:00 after the afternoon session and see how it goes. I appreciate you joining us, Ray, and for your insight and your comment today as we wrap it up.
All right.
All right. Take care, man. Thank you, folks, for joining us. Take care. Bye-bye.